Hello, everybody, and welcome as we're joining you live from Dallas, Texas. Again, we are live here at the Landon HQ again for this week. This is where I find myself a lot of the time these days, just kind of roaming around, just trying to find what exactly to do with myself. This is where I pretty much spent 98% of CDL Dallas was right in this seat right here. And I feel like I haven't had a whole lot of time to leave. But hey, that's all right. All good. NVTV. We are live on all of our platforms. That is YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. We've got an excellent show today. CDL Dallas. I mean, what an event, truly. That was a fantastic online event to spectate. I mean, really, this event, especially toward the last few days, was absolutely fantastic. Today, we're talking on all things CDL Dallas. Excited to kind of dive into a lot of the major conversations that are going to be taking place from now until then. Of course, all that and more ahead on Off the Break. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Off the Break, presented by Jack the Box. I'm Landon Lando Sanders. Sadly, we are not at the beautiful Frontier Communications Studio. I wish we were very much. I think we've all kind of gotten to this point where it's starting to get a little bit more sad over time that we are not in the Frontier Communications Studio. Wish we absolutely were, but I know that things are about to turn around. I have a feeling that maybe I actually don't even know, but I'm hoping within a month, 2 month, 3 month period of time, I don't even know what's going on, that we will eventually be back in the Frontier Communications Studio. I miss how lovely that place is and hope that we can get there very soon. Of course, very special thank you to all the folks that are listening to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, etc. If you are listening to this a little bit later on, greatly appreciated for you for tuning in here as well. If you haven't done so already, make sure to check out Off the Break on all podcast platforms in case you ever do miss an episode. So, first off, a shocker for many of us in CDL Dallas this past weekend. If you got a chance to watch it, feel free to let me know your thoughts. Obviously, here in the live chat, wherever you may be joining us from, whenever live stream. At the same time, you can also feel free to let us know that as well on Twitter, right? If you're watching the show a little bit later, feel free, interact, use the hashtag off the break. Let us know your thoughts about CDL Dallas. But the big shocker for many of us, right, was in fact the grand final and the ability for who was there. Florida and the Rocker in the grand final. Not many, if any at all, predicted for either of these two teams to make it here, right? Dallas Empire, Chicago Huntsman, nowhere to be seen. Definitely a surprise for me, as I expected to see the Guerrillas having more of an outburst in comparison to the Mutineers. Obviously, the Mutineers, they start to rise, they kind of carry on, progress forward in a very impressive manner, considering kind of how young this lineup is, how soon it has been since Pharaoh has really kind of joined the starting lineup. But nonetheless, right, Florida puts on a show as they take down Guerrillas 3-1, Ultra in the rematch 3-1, Chicago 3-1, and in the grand finals, the Rocker 3-1. For me, the overwhelming key to success for the Florida lineup and for the one that made the grand finals back in Atlanta is domination, right? They go 4-1 on the weekend. When they look good, their domination is always fantastic. In their series, if they won the game one hard point, they always won the domination, right? They always kind of have that game three that they can rely on, right? If they didn't, they close out the search and destroy. So like I said, let me lay this out. In their series, if they won the game one, they won the domination. If they didn't, in the one outlier, they always closed out the search and destroy. They always could rely on coming into game three either up 2-0 or at a 1-1 score line, and they have that game three to give them the edge. It is the swing game mode, and that is what they rely on to close out many of their victories, so much so that is what pretty much, in my eyes, was a huge opportunity that progressed them and got them over the edge. They always closed out as well. Something to keep in mind. Off of that domination, it also provided a little bit of a boost heading into the rest of the series, so much so that the Mutineers always closed out a game for Hardpoint in somewhat usual dominant fashion. Very, very impressive for the Mutineers to be able to do what they did, especially considering the teams that they faced off against. Getting back to the game for Hardpoint thing, their opponents only averaged 158 points in game 4 Hardpoint. Considering those teams include Rocker, Huntsman, Ultra, and Gorillas, is incredibly impressive, right? That game 4 Hardpoint, they were consistently dominating teams after the domination. It was a game 3 and game 4 swing. A lot of the times they relied on game 1. And obviously, a lot of the time as well, had the chance to close out the search and destroy. Florida, not typically an amazing search and destroy team. However, in their last 2 series, managed to get an off pick in Piccadilly. For those who got to watch the videos, I was trying to tweet about it as much as I possibly could. I love the idea that they were going to Piccadilly in kind of rather in these last 2 matchups that they had. Not typically a strong search and destroy team, but when they got Piccadilly, they managed to help make that role for them. That was the game that they kind of relied on, a particular map that they relied on, and it kind of helped them get through a few of their series. Now, these guys in particular looked excellent in the respawns primarily, right? They looked fine-tuned. They looked well prepared, and the guy that I mentioned watching, or rather that we were supposed to watch heading into the online league from Florida, was Pharaoh. And boy, did he make a massive impact on this team. Now, the reason why I didn't choose Mox, because that was kind of a hot commodity. A lot of people said, got to watch out for Mox, got to see how he translates, got to see how he plays. That wasn't the guy for me, because if we're going to expect to see someone like Mox be raised up, it isn't going to be on his own accord, right? That isn't how this works, right? You rely on your stars, and typically the team succeeds if 3 players are succeeding. If 3 players are playing well, the 2 others usually playing pretty well also. It doesn't work the same way that regular sports does, where it's like, hey, if one guy's hot, hey, it's great. No, the entire team at the same time also feels that, because they're getting in those same engagements. So I didn't feel like Mox was the guy for me. I thought that it'd be Pharaoh, because he was the person who I thought could make the overwhelming difference. And clearly, based on the way that they played, it seemed to be the case. Like I said, I think that the Florida Mutineers really catered off the way that he looked. He's the guy that's going to cause pretty much all the tides to really turn. That's going to be the impact player that they rely on, not just for this past event, but as well for future events. Given the current meta, I like Pharaoh a lot for that reason. Pharaoh was the consistent slayer that Florida needed, right? He put up a 1.24 overall. Skies no longer has to be the only one to carry a majority of the weight. He puts up a 1.21 in hardpoint. Granted, not a great search and destroy KD, 0.95. Obviously, like we talked about it, not amazing. What were the Mutineers really in search and destroy, despite a few of their victories that they had? And to go along with that, Pharaoh, domination, great game mode for this particular team. He finishes off with a 1.44 in domination. Shout out, by the way, to EasyMac for all these stats, as always. Really, this is the only person that kind of does it. It's not the only person that does it, but I think the person who does it the best. Make sure to check him out. But Pharaoh as well. Also, for those who have tracked this stat, and I'm going to go and label it out, Pharaoh had a 63.9% true engagement success rate. Now, that stat basically means that if anyone ever shot at Pharaoh in domination, 63.9% of the time, that person that shot is dead by either Pharaoh or by one of Pharaoh's teammates. And what's crazy to go along with a very, very, very high percentage in this particular game mode and category, what's crazy is that Mox and Skies were also around the lower 63% of that as well. And that is perfect trading out of the Mutineers, which Dom was their strong suit, and that stat goes to show it there. So, with all these stats and figures, right, that we're bringing up, all the numbers that we're talking about, from what we saw at CDL Dallas, realistically, can we expect this again? Right? I mean, can we expect the same result to happen from the Florida Mutineers? Can we expect Florida to be a contender for the future of the CDL, right? Do they have what it takes to win another championship this season? The way that I want to go about this isn't simply by just thinking yes or no. I want to look at the schedule that they actually have in front of them to really get this answer. I want to look at the schedule. I don't want to just assume, oh, well, Farrell played pretty well. If we see Havoc kind of play the same way that he did, the rotation man, whatever it may be. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to take a look at the schedule and see, is it realistically possible that they are a consistent contender for the remainder of the year? So let's go ahead and take a look at the remainder of the season that the Florida team, in terms of their schedule, has. So I'm not going to read these off for you. First home series coming up is going to be Chicago. They don't play there. So that's kind of a positive, right? You're not worried about Chicago. You're not worried about Dallas. You're not worried about Atlanta. All three of those teams are going to be there. Chicago, you're cool to miss that one because of how difficult it's absolutely going to be. You could argue based off momentum, hey, maybe they want to play. I think with all three of those teams there, it's not going to be a fun sight. It's not going to be fun for anybody who has to face off against all three of those teams, especially Atlanta. Next one, their home series, Florida. They'll be in a group with Minnesota, Toronto, and New York. We'll see how New York plays. We could say that we like their chances to get out of that one along with Minnesota. If they make it out of groups, they then have the opportunity to play Paris, London, OGLA, or FaZe. A lot of middle pack teams, right? Paris, London, OGLA, who knows where they're at, but the overwhelming force is FaZe. I'm not sure how they fare versus FaZe, but I don't think that it's likely, especially over a long period of time. So I personally will X out the Florida home series. Despite it being on their home turf, that probably will be their best opportunity if they ever want to beat FaZe for it to be then and there. Next one, Seattle home series, don't play, right? That's kind of unfortunate for them because there actually could be a huge opportunity if they were in Group A in Seattle, because that group is filled with London, LAG, Seattle, New York, some middle of the pack teams that are struggling right now. They probably could have easily made it out of that. And at the very least, they face off against Chicago in the finals, a team that they have a good history against, as they're currently 2-0 versus the Huntsman. So if they're in Seattle, there's a great opportunity right there, but they're not going to be there. Next one, Minnesota home series, play Chicago first round. You could say, hey, that's great, depending on the way that you look at it, longevity, but also have to worry about Toronto and LAG. I like their chances of getting out of that group and at least the second seed, as that was the story in Dallas as well, facing off against two other rosters that are obviously off that roster change, Toronto and LAG. Same story here. On the other side of the bracket, they'll have to face off against two out of the three: Dallas, Minnesota, Atlanta. Take your pick right now, especially between Dallas and Minnesota. But I probably Atlanta, right? Atlanta, probably along with Dallas or Minnesota. I like Florida, but I don't see them making it past two out of these three teams, especially if one of them is Atlanta. I X out the Minnesota home series. Next one, Paris. Play Paris first round. They'll have London and Dallas on the other side of the bracket. If they beat either Paris or London, they should be good to at least make it into the second seed, to make it then to the bracket stage. Now, if they do make it out in the second seed, which is very possible, they'll most likely play against FaZe first round. If they make it out in the first seed, they'll have to play them at least in the finals. It is hard to give Florida a continual edge, especially versus the Atlanta FaZe. I think I X out Paris as well. Next one, London home series. This is their ticket. All right. This is their chance. This is the Florida Mutineers' opportunity to get a victory here. They face off against OGLA first round. Later, either London or Seattle. In the bracket play, the only team that they have to worry about, and we'll see how Dallas progresses, but it's going to be the Empire. That's the only team that they really have to actually worry about. I think outside of OGLA, which, like I said, who knows their progression, but as of right now, if we see that same Florida play, you maybe like them versus Dallas, depending on who you are, depending on the day, this could be their chance. I like their possibility in London. Granted, it is one of the last events of the season. And the final one, Toronto home series. This will be one of the roughest groups of the year for them. In their group, they'll have to deal with Atlanta, Minnesota, and Dallas. If they can manage to escape it out of this group, they'll also have to worry about Chicago later on. And they may have to face off against one of the other teams that gets out of this group in terms of seeds. I don't like their chances in Toronto. So that's the way that the rest of the season shapes up for the Florida Mutineers. You have a constant Atlanta phase circling around you. Granted, at times you have opportunities, right? At times you have certain moments. I think the only event that they actually have a really good chance of maybe coming out with, depending on how they look on that day, unless we see some major upsets occur where Atlanta gets taken out, Dallas gets taken out, Chicago gets taken out, which is possible. But I think realistically, we're talking about London here, which is very far down the timeline. There could be multiple roster changes by then. Not just saying with the Florida, but other teams that could change things up a ton to really make these results a little bit different. But the question remains, do they have the capability to win more? Based on the way that they looked in Dallas, you're darn right they do, right? Based on the way that they looked in Dallas, they looked fantastic. They looked unbelievably great. But this is a team that by all accounts previously has been labeled and will be continued to be labeled as, until further notice, an inconsistent group until they show us more depth over time. So will they continue to be a threat? I think there's a very real chance of that. I do. I think they have a very good chance of being a threat over time. But a real championship contender that's constantly in the grand finals, I can't say that yet. I can't, in my mind, get myself to the point where I'm thinking, yes, Florida Mutineers will make it into multiple grand finals. They will have multiple times of chances of which they are going to be crowned champions. Based on their schedule, they may be in the grand finals from time to time, but to be a real contender, I don't know. I don't think that I'm there yet. I don't see that, at least yet. I don't think you can easily say that based on the small sample size. And what they did was no easy feat. But I've been saying this since the start of last year, or rather at the start of this year, excuse me, but kind of in terms of seasons, you get my point. This is a highly competitive league. I need 2, if not 3 events of same results to bank fully on whether or not a team is actually dropping or they're rising. And now with online events more than ever, we need more results. We need more of something to look at in order to assess properly. Based on the way that the Mutineers looked, that was the team, I think, at their best. I think that was them at their very highest potential. And don't get me wrong, I'm still holding on to see if they can make that last. But in my eyes, they shape up to be a wild card team that sits around the top 5 region, occasionally making some deep runs. That's where I stand right now with Florida. Like I said, I need to see more. I want to see more. I think there's some great potential there, but at least as of right now, I don't think that I have seen enough yet. I don't think that we have seen enough out of Florida. Granted, previous grand final appearance, they make a grand final appearance here and now. A lot of people want to put them kind of maybe in the higher position of their top 2. Don't hate that, but for me, I personally, that is very, I tend to not really move too much when it comes down to my top 4, top 5, top 6. I want to see some consistency before I do that. I like this group. I think they looked excellent. If that is even a taste of what is to come, I think that it's exciting. But at least for right now, I don't put them there yet. I don't put them in that constant position of making multiple grand finals, having a chance to win multiple titles for the future. As I expressed, I think looking ahead right now, London may be their one and only target, but we'll see. Now, one conversation that I find very interesting began to brew as Florida were being crowned champions. The question remains, does this title for the Florida Mutineers count as a major championship? Now, for those that don't understand the terminology, I don't blame you, right? We have minor tournament wins and we have major tournament wins. We also have world championships that also are considered major tournament wins. Sadly, in Call of Duty, due to the lack of conversation, these tournaments have begun to blend together, right? Some people don't know one from another. Some people don't understand the difference between one particular tournament versus the next. And I don't blame you for not knowing that. I really don't. I don't blame you for not understanding, because it very much makes sense. What defines a major championship, right? These are the questions. What defines a major championship? Should online events be in consideration? If not, right, if not all 12 teams are in attendance, is it truly a major? Now, the reason why this matters is that championships all funnel into legacy, right? The greats in Call of Duty history have all won tournaments, right? They've all won majors, and most of them have won world championships. Now, many don't know this, but I have been discussing this terminology thing for years now. I can remember for the last 3 seasons, at the start of each year, I always discuss this exact same subject, and I did it at the start of this season as well. We need to figure this out, right? We need to figure out the major versus minor difference, because if not, we're going to get so caught up in the different tournament details that we'll start to forget one from the next. We'll forget the little minor details of what was one event previously than to what is one now. Now, to be honest, when we were doing the CDL on LAN, I went back and forth constantly about whether or not these tournaments should count. But I want to get this out there. This is what I said when the conversation first formed, and this was before COVID-19 impacted the CDL. The first CDL season will always have an asterisk next to it. Obviously now with COVID, but also because not every team is there at events to compete. What happens if the considered best team in the world doesn't attend an event, right? Can you call it a major then? Can you be considered a major champion if not every top team is in attendance? But I want to remind everyone of one thing. Years down the line, this really doesn't matter, right? Years down the line, we're looking 3, 4, 5, 6 seasons down the line. This doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. I mean, I get the current argument's sake because we're in this right now, right? I get why we're talking about this currently. But for the future, Call of Duty titles will be known as CDL tournament victories and world championships. There will be no conversation about major versus minor for the future. Franchising will eventually engulf old Call of Duty history so much that pros in future years will solely hold CDL championship victories. You don't believe me? So far this season, 10 players that have previously never won a major championship ever in Call of Duty history won a CDL event. Every team that's won so far this season had at least one player that has never won a major championship before. So when Florida and the rest of the players that have won for the first time, right, they're looking at their resume, do they put in that resume that they are a major champion, right? In terms of the resume, do they put that in the major championship area? I think they do. I do. I think that if you are Florida, if you are a player that has won so far throughout this CDL season, when you're looking at your resume, when you're kind of marking things down, do you mark the fact that you've won a CDL championship off the list? I think you do. I absolutely think you do. But with the realization that it doesn't mean as much as other CDL championships to follow. This competition that they are facing off against is major competition, right? Best teams in the world, best players in the world. But let me be clear. I'm not saying this is equal to future CDL championships. I'm saying that it belongs in the same circle. It belongs under the same title, the same category. Because for the future of the Call of Duty League, all the rest will count, right? All the rest of these homestands in year 2, year 3, so on, will count. We as a Call of Duty community need to realize that this entire year, not just with 8 teams, but with COVID, it has changed everything. It has changed for us. It has changed for sports as well. Everything is put on pause. We're entering a time period where everything is put on hold, right? Like I said, every sports league is put on a permanent wait. Now, I want to address a few things. The argument, well, MLG 2Ks that we've had previously, prior online tournaments, those should probably count if these do. What? No, that is not at all the same thing. These are different. The difference is that this is the only possible form of competition that we humanly can have. We have no choice In online 2Ks, there was a higher level of competition that was available, right? We had major LAN tournaments that were constantly happening. Right now, you have no choice. This is the highest level of competition that can exist, right? The Call of Duty League is the highest that you can reach. It's not as if we have a league anymore, and then we have major tournaments and Columbus and Anaheim and Vegas. We don't have that anymore. And when I reference that we're going from LAN to online, LAN should count for more. Don't get me wrong on that. So let me make myself clear for the entire Call of Duty scene, because I'm tired of getting the same continuous argument. Are CDL events, meaning both LAN and online, are both CDL events, or rather, are they in general majors, right? Are CDL events major championships? They are listed under majors for the record books and for player statistics. But these events are not the same standard that next year will be, or that actual prior majors were. So does Hook, Illy, Shotzi, Havoc, Mox, Envoy, Frosty, Skies, Major Maniac, Celium, do they get to add this to their list as a major? Yes, they do. But with the realization that while they did win, it doesn't mean as much as prior and future major tournament victories. The same applies to previous sports in the early seasons, right? When competition wasn't at its highest, Bill Russell, widely regarded as an 11-time NBA champion, they look back at those as a time of lesser competition. So that while he does have 11 rings, it doesn't mean as much as someone who recently maybe has 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, right? I mean, in terms of the GOAT conversation, people put in terms of championships kind of a lower amount versus his, and sometimes take the lower amount because of the difference of competition and because of the difference of time. Now, we in Call of Duty aren't saying that competition from a player's standpoint is weak, but that the format and the fact that we are online is making it more weak than it previously and in the future will be. This year has to count for something, right? But the only for sure championship that will have no question marks, no asterisks next to it, will be the Call of Duty World Championship. It will be the CDL Championship. As long as that is played on LAN, that is the only guarantee as a player that you have. End of discussion, right? That is where I finally end what has been a very frustrating topic for the last year, and one that originated many years ago. Now, in one of my last conversations about majors versus minors, I mentioned that we need to go back and see which championships count versus others. We need to set in place a particular criteria from top teams to time to time period, etc. All that needs to factor in so that we are all on the same page. Do I expect this to happen? No, I really don't. I'll be honest with you. I don't expect anybody to actually do this. And for that reason is why COD pros, if they actually care about their legacy, they need to ensure that CDL championships aren't the only thing that is considered for the future and the greatest player of all time conversation. Because if we never get this ironed out, and we start to look back at one championship from 2012 from this particular player, and it may get thrown out because of time period, it's going to cause problems. And it needs to get done. End of story. I'm tired of talking about it. I'm tired of us constantly discussing whether or not this counts. I think in terms of where these players sit, do you mark it under major? You do. But for the future, because this year has to count in some particular way, you put an asterisk next to it in some capacity to say, you know what? This was year one, right? This was the first year. It counts, but it is not held to the same standards that prior major tournament victories were, and that not future CDL championships can live up to. That's where I'm at. That's where I sit with it, and that's where I believe that the rest of the Call of Duty community needs to sit with it as well, because in my mind, that's internally the way that I'm going to think about it for the future. Now, one very interesting aspect about this weekend that really shocked me, almost more than anything, was that Chicago didn't make it to the grand final. Right, let's get back to that. Let's discuss CDL Dallas a little bit more. Because this team, in terms of Chicago, after groups, was a shoo-in to make it there, right? I mean, we talked about it leading up on our prior off the break episode discussed, oh, this is Chicago's. I mean, really, this is Chicago's event to win. They make it out of groups. Who do they have to face off against? Right? Let's adjust our memories back to the start of the event when we discussed which new roster change team would make it to the second seed of Group A. Right? Would it be the new look Toronto roster with Looney out and Metals in? Would it be the Gorillas? Right now in an online environment, they've had some time to work. How can the three guys really start to mesh more? And finally, Florida, right? Pharaoh officially locked in. First real tournament together with practice. How do the Mutineers start to look? These teams that were still working things out were the only thing stepping in the way of the Huntsmen making it to a grand final. And now for 2 events straight, they get knocked out by a hot Florida team, this time in a 3-1 fashion, to a previous 3-2 reverse sweep last time. And for those that remember the first reverse sweep that did take place in Atlanta, may not remember the near Game 5, Round 11 that they had earlier in the tournament with the Toronto Ultra, a lineup that is not even as good as they are right now. This has been back-to-back LAN and now online issue. This team, we hold to a higher standard. At least I previously did, right? I mentioned that in Atlanta, Chicago proved that they weren't in the same tier as FaZe, right? Chicago is proving now that they may not be in the same tier as a few other rosters as well. Now, it's hard to judge. It is. It's hard to judge considering this event with Rockers lost to Florida, Dallas not making it to the finals, etc. And trust me, I understand very well the online element. I talked to a ton of players post the event, had a chance to interview a few of the players, totally understand the online element and how that factors in. But from Arcides himself, I'll let him take it away for me. He made it very, very clear on Twitter, I quote, "Online wasn't a problem. We just don't play right." In response to a fan who also mentioned, and in a reply to this exact tweet, pretty much the fan replied and said, "Hey, it isn't LAN. Don't worry about it. You're good. Don't worry about it." Arcides replied, "Online or LAN, we lost because we didn't play good." Arcides is making it very clear that they aren't playing well regardless of where they are. Regardless of the online servers, they are having problems. Now, we need to address the fact that Chicago decided to go through with the role change for the event, putting Formal on the flex, Arcides in the main AR. Arcides plays fine, Formal does not, right? Lowest KD since I can honestly even remember, a 0.83. I get these across the country, but that didn't seem to affect other teams that are across the country, right? Minnesota in particular, spread all throughout the country. They've got ASIM in Canada. They've got GodRx in Maryland. They have Silly in Las Vegas. They got players all spread out, right? But still yet, the problems that Chicago had previously are only continuing to echo. Go back and look at the whole event. They don't have a single dominant victory outside of the Gunrunner Dom that they faced off and had versus Paris the whole event, which I'll be honest was actually a very solid victory. I will give them that, right? That is Paris's best map/game mode in their entire pool, right? That is by far their best game mode. Props to Chicago for taking it the way that they did, but that is the only one that was dominant, right? All the hard points they won. The enemy was always at least 200 points or more. They won a 6-5 and a 6-4 search and destroy off the back of Envoy and a full sail 5-0 comeback. They take down Minnesota. Give them credit for that, right? Absolutely. Give them credit for that. But they did the exact same thing in Atlanta, right? We're talking about things echoing, things continuing. The exact same thing takes place. They match up well versus the Rocker, take them down, but then they have struggles versus teams that they should be beating. Right? Respawns one day look great. Hardpoint at times is fantastic. Had the event in London where Search and Destroy looked absolutely killer. Now they're relying on a 1.62 KD from Envoy just to barely squeak by. Chicago, I believe, is a group of players. I don't think they're a fully functioning team yet. I don't think online helps them. I don't think that the role change helped them. But still, yet, this is supposed to be a defined top 2 team in the world. I get the conversation about other rosters because other rosters haven't been the most consistent. But we have held Chicago to a second best team in the world that is different from third, that is different from fourth, fifth, sixth. This is top 2, right? You are drawn to comparisons with Atlanta. Let's stop this. Chicago, if they faced off against Atlanta right now, based on the way the Huntsmen have looked at the past 2 events, it wouldn't be a pretty sight. It would be a fun series for the storylines, but once we get in the game, it wouldn't be that same story. This is a loss that I hope Chicago really takes to heart. The first one, off event, right? First one, big deal. We lost. I get it. It happens, right? You're going to have your off events from time to time. Not everybody's going to win them all. But this online loss, they really need to focus on, because it is not just one at one point, then a few events later. No, it's back to back, right? We're seeing a little bit of a consistent line that's starting to be drawn. This online loss, they really need to focus on and make sure it doesn't happen again, because we've got their homestand up next. And odds say they in FaZe will probably match up at some point, right? They've got to worry about FaZe and Dallas, London, hopefully a solid New York team. If Chicago beats New York in the first round, you know who they're playing? They're playing FaZe, folks. They're playing FaZe for first seed in their pool. This match is going to happen. Whether you like it or not, this match is going to happen in the second round. It may happen again. It may happen twice. This match is going to happen, and Chicago and their current form aren't winning that. From a map-by-map perspective, going off of game modes, I think depending on the hardpoint map, maybe you give a split to Chicago if they really do improve. I don't give them either of the search and destroys right now, because as much as I love Envoy's performance versus FaZe, it's not going to work, right? You're facing off against the best search and destroy team in the entire world. They're prepared for more things than you can imagine, and they're prepared to shut one player down who has been pretty much the entire strategy for Chicago throughout most of the year, relying on players or one player to get them to the finish line in S&D, right? Scump previously, Envoy most recently. At times, Arcides in the earlier stages, and at certain points, Arcides looks fantastic. But they can't rely on one player here and there. Much like the loss the Huntsmen suffered in Atlanta, this, I think, is another crack in the glass. For those that haven't heard my prior example, the crack in the windshield, you don't address it, what happens, right? The crack spreads. It spreads until the whole windshield is ruined. You don't address the little things, that can start to spread and cause major problems. Arcides said it, right? Don't take it from me, take it from Arcides. He said it. They aren't playing right. Something isn't working like it should, and they are receiving negatives from it. I want to leave you with one final thought, right? We talked about their matchups versus FaZe. One final thought. What happens if Chicago loses to Atlanta? What happens if Atlanta, like expected, wins the Chicago home series? And what seems to be a rocky time right now, if that roster, in terms of Huntsman, don't put up a good fight versus Atlanta, and FaZe goes on to win the Chicago home series, what happens then? What happens at that point? Right? Let's just say I'd be very interested to see what happens then. As much as we consider home turf to not really mean as much for online, for Chicago, the fan base, it does matter. It does matter for these guys. It is added pressure. As minor as it may be, this is when they want to win, right? Chicago wants to get the victory. They want to be the first team to reach 2 championships over a squad like Atlanta. They want to do that, and they want to do it on their turf. Huntsmen want to win CDL Chicago. That is the way that it works. More probably this one than most events throughout the season, especially because the new kids on the block might be the ones to take it from them, right? These new kids on the block that they have been so conscious about throughout the start of the season and interviews at launch weekend. We're just prepared for Atlanta. When we came into the first event of the year, we're just prepared for Atlanta. This is all practice for Atlanta. We're excited to face off against FaZe. They're a solid team. I think it's going to be a good match between us. It's another crack in the glass. I've said it since the beginning. The signs, we've seen them, right? Little quotes, little interviews. I think that Chicago is a time bomb. I think it's a ticking time bomb that, given the right timing, a loss during a weak point of the team versus their rival at their homestand, a team that's trying to take the throne from this roster until they face off against one another. Still kind of unproven who is that team. This has been the major storyline throughout the year. And if they lose it, what happens next? Right? That might be the timing that makes things the worst it could possibly be. It's the way that I sit with Huntsman right now. I am worried about the group. I really am. I'll be honest with you. I'm worried about the Chicago Huntsman. I've said it since the beginning. I don't know how this team meshes with each other. From the interviews, from the tweets, something's going on, right? Something's just not there. And I don't know if it's a matter of a substitution, if it's a communication problem, if it's just them not practicing. That's been a tweet that we've seen from Arshdees in the past, that they just don't practice enough, right? I don't know exactly. You know, you can obviously take that however you'd like, but at the very least, that is a player who clearly isn't happy with the way the team is going. Arshdees close to gunless. Is that a two-person thing that is now angry at the other three? I don't know. A lot to think about. Especially coming into what should be a very interesting Chicago home series. Chicago and Atlanta, they're going to face off against each other. What happens? Right? How do you respond to that? What happens if you lose? Right? Are they planning for that? If not, what takes place? It's going to be fun. A lot of interesting stuff going down in Call of Duty right now, folks. I'll tell you what, it has been a blast to talk about the CDL, especially considering that we actually have stuff to talk about. Not that we didn't have enough to talk about when it came down to COVID-19, the big break that we had when it came down to the CDL season kind of being put on pause. But it's been a blast to watch some Call of Duty this past weekend. If you get a chance to, make sure to let us know on Twitter. You can tweet at myself, at Lando. You can tweet at Envy as well. Use the hashtag Off the Break. Let us know your thoughts on CDL Dallas. What you thought about the event? How was it? Did you get a chance to watch? What teams surprised you? What teams are you looking out for the future? Answer a few of the questions that we had, as we had a great time talking about Call of Duty. Florida's win at CDL Dallas. Are they a future title contender? Does online count as a major championship? And what is happening with the Huntsman? What is causing this slump? And when, if will, it start to end? Like I said, either if you're with us live or if you are watching this a little bit later on, feel free. Like I said, you guys can get the conversation as well for those who may be listening to this at a little bit of a later time. Again, thank you to everybody for listening to us live, as well as to all of our listeners on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, etc. Like I said, again, to everybody who also watched us live, very special thank you to you as well. You can catch Off the Break every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Central. That's 7 p.m. Eastern time. Here, obviously, on our multiple platforms, on YouTube, on Twitch, Twitter as well. Like I said, folks, enjoy the rest of your day wherever you may be, and we'll see you on Thursday. Have a great week, and thank you so much for watching Off the Break.